and welcome to 19 Washington Square, New York, which is the home of NYU Abu Dhabi in New York. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors for tonight, the Center for Religion and Media, led by Faye Ginsberg, Angela Zito, and Peggy Dale, who just walked in, and the Hop Working Center for Near Eastern Studies, led by Nart Bouran, who is right here. Tonight's event, as you all know, features a discussion of Sky News Arabia, a news channel based in Abu Dhabi, launched in 2010, with the mission to create an impartial and independent breaking news channel for the Arab world across multiple platforms. We have tonight Nart Bouran, who is Director of News for Sky News Arabia, that's my sister, and we're very pleased that he was able to make the journey from Abu Dhabi to be here in New York. Mr. Bouran is a graduate of Syracuse University and began his career as a video journalist in the Middle East in the 1990s, reporting from Iraq, Somalia, Libya, Algeria, Yemen, Israel, and the Palestinian territories. He later moved to London to become editor of Middle Eastern and Africa Regional Editor at Reuters Television. Mr. Bouran then relocated to Jordan as the Director General of the National Broadcaster Jordan Radio and Television Corporation, during which time he received the Kingdom's Medal of Honor from King Abdullah II. In 2002, he joined Abu Dhabi TV as Director of News, and then later rejoined the Reuters News Agency, where he had global responsibilities for video products and services on the World News Service of Reuters News Agency. From Reuters, Mr. Bouran then joined Sky News Arabia in 2011. Our second guest tonight is Dr. James Zogby, founder and president of the Arab American Institute, a Washington, D.C.-based organization which serves as the political and policy research arm of the Arab American community. Dr. Zogby is quite active in U.S. politics. Most recently, in 1995, DNC Chairman Don Fowler appointed Dr. Zogby as co-convener of the National Democratic Ethnic Coordinating Committee, an umbrella organization of the Democratic Party leaders of European, Canadian, and Mediterranean descent. In 1999 and 2001, he was re-elected to that post. Also in 2001, he was appointed to the Executive Committee of the Democratic National Committee, and in 2006, he was also named co-chair of the DNC's Resolutions Committee. In 1993, going back in time for a moment, following the signing of the Israeli-Palestinian Peace Accord in Washington, he was then asked by Vice President Al Gore to lead Builders for Peace, a private sector committee to promote U.S. business investment in the West Bank and Gaza. Dr. Zogby also appears frequently on television and radio. From 2001 until now, he hosts the award-winning Viewpoints with James Zogby on Abu Dhabi Television, Lynn TV, Dish Network, and DirecTV. He has also had a significant academic career. He was on several occasions awarded grants for research and writing by the Knight Foundation, National Endowment of the Humanities, the National Defense Education Act, and the Mellon Foundation. Dr. Zogby received a Bachelor of Arts from Lemoyne College, and in 1995, Lemoyne awarded Dr. Zogby an honorary doctoral of laws degree, and in 1997 named him the college's outstanding alumnus. In 2007, Temple University, where he earned his PhD, named him its distinguished alumni. Relevant for this evening, Dr. Zogby is chairman of the Editorial Advisory Committee for Sky News Arabia and will provide a wonderful conversation for us. Without further ado.
Well, thank you very much. I should have shortened my biography a little bit. I didn't make it that long. I really appreciate the invitation. It's great to be here. I was going to tell you a little bit more about myself, but I think that's all taken care of. I just wanted to take you through some of the slides and show you a little bit more about Sky News Arabia, why it was created, and have a little bit of a discussion around afterwards maybe some of the information that I'll share with you. Just to give you a quick further background on myself, I was born in Jordan. I am Jordanian, and then but you can tell from the name that it's a little bit different. So I'm of Circassian descent. So that means my grandparents immigrated from the the Caucasus in the late 1800s. I am also a British national. I'm also educated in the US, and I live in Abu Dhabi. So a lot of people would say that's a recipe for complete confusion. I actually consider myself very lucky that I've been able to live in all these places and study and work in different places in different countries. My beginning of my journalism was because I actually didn't study journalism. I studied international law and international relations. I decided that in the beginning what I would do is throw myself into any assignment that would be available for a young aspiring journalist at 21. So my first assignment was Baghdad in 1991, and then from then on I don't think I stopped for several years until I decided to go into management and became the editor in London in 1996. This project has been quite amazing in all ways, really. I decided to take it because it was unique, it was something different, it was something that had, in my view, a great chance to succeed. And we really are very excited about where this is going to go. This is a long-term project. This is not one of these channels that have come up and see how it goes. And then make a lot of changes. There's a lot of commitment from the management and from the board of directors. And we also have a great distinguished editorial advisory committee that Dr. Jim is the chairman of, which is also responsible for maintaining editorial standards and making sure that there's a constant review of our content, of our coverage, and make sure that we stay as the board of trustees for our editorial standards in some ways. So I don't expect you really to know much about Sky News or watched it. Sky News Arabia, that is. So just to give you a flavor, if you don't mind, I'll show you just a very, very short video.
المساء من سكاي نيوز عربية. وتبدل علاقات زيارة رئيس
من قلب الحدث لحظة وقوعه الحدث كما هو بأدق التفاصيل.
So, who are we? Sky News Arabia is a joint venture. I'll stay on the microphone so I don't want it. Is a joint venture between ADNIC and B-Sky-B. ADNIC is a privately owned company by Sheikh Mansour bin Zayed. He has a lot of investments in a lot of areas, and one of them is his inaugural project is in media. So it's a 50-50 joint venture with B-Sky-B. And what we've really tried to do is to bring the international standards of B-Sky-B and use it in local knowledge and insight. What we've been able to accomplish over the last year, 2 years, is to bring the knowledge of Sky News in the UK and implement a lot of the standards that they've established for themselves over many years in editorial context. So what we've also try to achieve is that we will try to reach any Arabic speaker, wherever that is. So what we've been able to establish is a very robust platform to distribute our content through multimedia, online, as well as a bouquet of satellites, including Arabsat and Hotbird and Ridsat and Astra, and a few other TV platforms in Europe, and live streaming in live station actually in the US. So what we've done is try to start strong with a 24/7 on all these platforms and try to spread as much as we can over the first year of our establishment. We're less than a year old on air, so we started on May 6th. Our first group of bureaus are across the Arab world, as you would expect, 16 bureaus, and another quite a big hub in Washington, D.C. and in London, and we're just about to open a bureau at the UN here in New York. So this is just a quick look at who we are. The convergence of platforms, what we've also tried to do here is we're not entirely, we're not really pioneers in using social media and putting our content on mobiles and iPads and iPods and all that sort of thing. What we're trying to do is establish something. And we will get to it hopefully a bit later when you'll see what we're trying to establish with our multimedia offering. And it's basically building everything up at the same time. Most of the Arab TV stations have started 10 years ago or a bit longer than that, like al-Jazeera and al-Arabiya, and everybody keeps on tagging items to it. So what we've built is a complete management system that we can distribute our content on all platforms simultaneously. And that's really been one of our biggest strengths, and the uptake in social media has been quite significant as well for our platforms. To give you an idea of the Arab TV scene, media scene, it's a brutal market. It is absolutely brutal. There's about 800 channels, and it's quite unique. And it's if you're not very familiar with the Arab market, it's like none other, because you're stretching from Mauritania all the way to Bahrain over all these two continents, as well as a large Arab-speaking population in Europe and in the US. But at the same time, the commercial structure around all these channels is not doesn't really reflect the existence of 800 plus channels, and that number is growing as well. So it's not like it's a smaller number. So it's quite a brutal market that we've come into, and what you have is a division of the channels. So you have your pan-Arab channels, where like Al Jazeera, al-Arabiya, and we're there also with that category. There's also a lot of sponsored channels. So you'll see a channel that is sponsored by the British government, or the French government, the Russian government, the US government, all these other channels of sponsored channels that's directly funded one way or another by governments. So in a way, you've got these two main competing, but certainly in terms of viewership, the pan-Arab channels are far more advanced in terms of viewership than the others. And then you have the local channels, and this is where it's becoming very, very interesting, because in the past, it was mainly government channels running the media, and the existence of Al Jazeera and al-Arabiya as pan-Arab channels. And then with time, and the changes that are going on, you have these channels coming up, like on TV, MTV, and this is certainly probably hundreds from the 800 that I'm talking about. Whereas in the past, it was purely government channels that have an agenda. It's a very filled with protocols and long newscasts of leaders walking down red carpets and that kind of thing. But that's really all changed with the existence or the birth of Al Jazeera and al-Arabiya, and then these other sponsored channels that came along afterwards. So this is just an idea of the second thing, which is very interesting about the region. That if you look at the under 30 population, it's quite significant. It's amazing numbers. If you look at places like Yemen, Iraq, Sudan, Jordan, all these places where you have such a huge population of under 30s. So you've got that one element of a large amount of content being produced by these 800 channels, very robust production of content coming out from all these channels. You couple that with a very young population in the demographics, and you can come up with some pretty interesting things, like the things that are happening in the region. I think this slide is a little bit unfair, because not all the changes that are happening are involving explosions of bombs and tanks. There's a lot of change that's happening on a social economic front, and all these places, especially where there's been a lot of change, like Syria is ongoing, but in Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, all these places is creating this change that's happening in the region with all these other factors of a lot of content, a very young population, and things happening, is really quite a mixture of a recipe for a lot of things to happen. The main effect of all those elements is good news for someone like me who's never done anything other than news and television news, is that the appetite is huge. The appetite for news is like nowhere else in the region as well. The Pan-Arab news channels are among the top 10 channels watched in the whole Arab world, in all those countries, among those 800 channels. So if you look at it that way, I don't think you can compare news viewership in Europe or in the US the way we can compare it to what's happening in the Arab world. 11 new channels launched in Egypt after the revolution. All these things are impacting lives of the Arab population, especially with the younger generation that I mentioned. Some interesting numbers as well. I think in terms of numbers compared to the US, they don't sound like a lot, but I think the growth and the percentage of the growth every year is significant. When you look at the age group that we're talking about, 70% Facebook users are between 15 and 29 in the Arab world. If you look at uploads of video on YouTube, we come second after the US. So that's a lot of content being uploaded. The number that we have here is an hour of Arabic YouTube content uploaded every minute. 6 million tweets a day. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Twitter is very, very big and increasing. So these are some of the indications why we think our multimedia platform is going to help in the future. What it has done, one of the interesting parts about this, and this is in no way significant of the viewership numbers or the importance, but it's just mixed things up together. It's put the Pan-Arab and local channels together. They complement each other, they intersect in a lot of ways, and they've put the sponsored channels in third place, probably even in 10th place compared to the other channels. And basically what has happened in the region, that you've got people are very interested in what's happening down the street from where they live, but also they're interested in the region because of everything that's happening. So you'd expect an Egyptian, with all the things that are happening in Egypt, would be focused on the events in their home country. True, but things that are happening in Yemen, things that are happening in Syria, in Libya, and in Tunisia is always of interest to the Arab viewers. So it's mixed things up together. But it's a question that I always get asked every time I talk about local versus Pan-Arab, and whether one is cannibalizing the other. I don't really think so. I think it's a complementing effect that it has with Pan-Arab and the local channels. And it's quite an interesting number if you look at 8 in Egypt that have come up. But also the government channels are having to compete and having to change. But again, they're not learning from the lessons of their predecessors, and it tends to implement the government point of view. It just happens to be a different government with a different point of view. But certainly in places like Libya and Tunisia, where, for example, Mesma TV, a very small channel that I went to visit also a while ago, and it's a one big room operation that's giving the government a lot of headache with their puppet show that they have, political puppet shows and talk shows that go on for 2 or 3 hours, and it's had some impact in the country. So it's really a very dynamic and changing region that we're living in at the moment, and the competitive landscape, although brutal, but the appetite is quite big. So what we're really hoping to do with this is that with our editorial standards that we're trying to establish as Sky News. So Dr. Jim asked me specifically not to make this a promotional talk, so I wasn't going to. So it was more about telling you what's going to happen in the region or what's happening in the region. But certainly, from a Sky News al-Arabiya point of view, what we're trying to do with the joint venture and the structure that we have in place with the board of directors, editorial advisory committee, and with the structure of the joint venture for 50-50 with 2 board members from Sky in the UK and 2 from Abu Dhabi, is to make sure that moving forward our editorial standards of everything we're trying to say of balance and objectivity. We have a very strict style book and code of ethics that we've implemented, and all our employees, the 420 employees that we have to sign up, and it's part of their contract. We do refresher courses twice a year for all our journalists, very strict with our terminology, our use of words, and what we're trying to establish from a journalistic point of view. But also, if you take that with a different style, which is predominant in the region of long-form programs and 2 or 3 hour talk shows, and making the presentation fast and modern and innovative, and that's where we're trying to attract the viewers and try to make a difference in terms of the way we present it, what we're presenting, and giving a younger demographic within even the organization. Our average age is 33 in the organization. I probably am the one who messed up the graph for that, and probably a lot of my colleagues. But we've got 23, 24-year-old presenters who are doing main shows and prime time, and it's making a difference. We can see the reaction from viewers, and we can see that we've given a new generation of presenters and journalists an opportunity that they didn't have before. In fact, we went out of our way not to poach presenters from other channels, from the other established channels, and try to bring up some of the new talent that we have and train them. And that's really, with something like 37 nationalities, average age of 33, all the cool gadgets that they have with multimedia and a fantastic studio, is really what we're trying to make this a different place. I'm always asked about what is the vision also. Where do we see this being in a few years? And I think in this particular market, because of the brutality of it, as I mentioned, you have to have a long-term game, and you have to think of it at least in 10 years. What is the plan in 10 years? But to put it simply, really, what we've been trying to establish is that Sky News al-Arabiya becomes the destination for Arab journalists. That it becomes a place where the reputation in the market that Sky News al-Arabiya is a new place. It's got editorial standards, it's got balance, and it's got objectivity in the way that we discuss topics. And as a company from a corporate point of view, that we are the best out there, and hopefully get students as soon as they graduate and as soon as they are interested in this field, that this is a place where they want to go. One last point I'll make is on a program that we have, which we started at Sky. It's called SNAP, Sky News al-Arabiya program. And one of our mandates by the board of directors is to try to bring up new Emirati talent, and try to bring some new younger graduates who are interested in the media in the UAE. And one of the things that we've done is started this program where we take 30 students every year, twice a year actually, and we give them an intensive 2-week course in everything that you could possibly think of when you're working in a newsroom, whether it's writing, whether it's camera work, whether it's editing, gallery operations, outside operations, everything. And then those who are interested in that field can join us on an on-job training for a minimum of 3 months. And then try to recruit some of the ones that have decided this is where they want to go and this is what they want to do. And it's been, if you look at the numbers, you take 60 a year, and then you've got 10 doing on-job training, and then recruiting 3 or 4 a year. It doesn't sound like a lot of students that we take on, but we're hoping that this will pick up, and this is going to be a great value for the UAE as time goes on, because there's no point in trying to poach from Abu Dhabi TV or from Dubai TV and all the other channels. What we're trying to do is to grow the pie and grow the number of students who are interested in the program and interested in media studies. And that's been really a great success for us, and it's had an impact in the local market as well. I hope that wasn't too long. I didn't bore you to death. I'll hand over to Dr. Jim, and I'll be more than happy to take questions afterwards and discuss whatever you like. Thank you.
I like this Dr. Jim thing. I've got that before.
That's very reason.
Yeah. That makes it easy. They're 40, so it's not going to matter. She forgot one important part of my bio. I've had the pleasure of teaching 2 J terms at the Abu Dhabi campus, and it's been just an extraordinary experience. If you're from this campus, you really want to spend a wonderful January with incredible kids from all over the world, that's the place to go. And get at least a dozen countries in each class, and every kid's somewhere. It's just been a wonderful experience. I woke up this morning sounding like this. I don't normally talk this way. Tomorrow I'll be fine. It was just for you that I came this way. I just want to start with a couple of stories about Arabs and media. Let's sort of take a step back from Nart leading up to Sky. He makes the point about the diversity of media. And the interesting thing is that Arabs know that. They understand it and they're discerning about it. I remember when I was very, very young, 1971, I spent the semester at AU University of Beirut doing my doctoral research. And every day people would go over to Uncle Sam's, which was the coffee shop right across the street. And they'd sit there at a table with 5 or 6 newspapers. One, the pro-Saudi paper, the pro-American paper, the pro-French paper, the pro-Russian paper, back when that mattered, and the pro-whatever paper. And they'd argue, knowing that each paper had a distinct point of view, and that the truth was someplace in the middle, if it could be found at all. And that has continued. I was in Saudi Arabia during the beginning of the uprisings in Tunisia, and the Lebanese government was falling. Saad Hariri was on his way out, and there was obvious turbulence going in the country. And we were sitting after dinner watching television. There were about 14 in the room, and al-Jazeera was on. And then they would flip it over to al-Arabiya. And one was pro-Qatari and one was pro-Saudi. And they have distinct points of view. And they'd go back and forth, listening to the same story told 2 ways, arguing the perspective of, should we be supporting Saad Hariri, or should we be supporting the March 8th opposition? Should we be supporting Ben Ali, or should we be supporting the uprising? And they went back and forth quite heated until, this is another point, the son, 24-year-old or so son of one of the guys comes into the room and says, "It's on." He grabs the remote control and puts on Arabs Got Talent. And we watched that for the rest of the night. The side point is that even though news goes up, Arabs watch television like everybody else watches television. They exercise their thumbs quite vigorously on remote control, and they really watch it to be entertained. In all of our polling, #1 shows are still movies, and soap operas do really well. game shows, reality shows, and all the music shows. They love music shows. And it's a diverse market looking at the world as people see it in their real lives. They're not consumed with information and news and violence and the notion in America that Arabs go to bed at night angry at America, wake up in the morning angry at Israel, and spend the day watching al-Jazeera getting angrier, you know, or going to the mosque and hearing some preacher get them even angrier. That's not the case. They get home from work, they watch movies, and they watch game shows, and they'll turn to the news. It's a demanding market. There's a competitive market. But they go to bed at night, forget about their kids, and wake up worried about their jobs. I mean, they're like everybody else in the world. Our polling shows entertainment and then news. And Arabs, like I said, are discerning about the news. And this has had an impact on what Nart was talking about. The novelty of the international channel, the Pan-Arab channel, it's not that it's worn off, but it's kind of caught up with itself. Because, especially with the uprising, the leanings of the Qatari network and the leanings of the Saudi network have had an impact. As people wonder, why are they covering Libya this way? Why aren't they covering Bahrain in the same way? Why are they covering Syria this way and not looking at, etc.? So that sense of people being in a sense of agitation over all of this, and then looking for something that would tell them the story straight. They understand the game. You know, al-Arabiya versus al-Jazeera versus Arabs Got Talent. If I'm watching news to be entertained, I'll take real entertainment. But if I want news because I want to be informed, then they actually want to go someplace else. And one of the reasons that we've seen in our polling that the local networks have taken over in several countries is because people want something close to home that they can trust. So in most of the countries right now, when you ask what's the news network you watch most, it's a local variation. Even in UAE, for example, you will get Sky News' numbers go very high. In Saudi Arabia, al-Arabiya, which is a Saudi network, is very high. In Lebanon, it's LBC and MTV. In Tunisia and Egypt, they're local stations. Kuwait's the same. And so this competitive market, people knowing when they're being played and not wanting to be played, and wanting information that's straight, has created a change in the market as well. A comment about Arab journalists, which I always feel I'm not an Arab journalist. I'm an American who had the great fortune of having a television show on 3 different Arab networks. And sadly, it's not till now. That was an old bio. I feel like, you remember Burt Parks? Price is Right? Oh my God, he's so dead and gone that nobody even remembers him. He's still alive, incidentally. I used to say when my show ended, Nart Parks did The Price is Right for like decades. And I said when the show ended, people would say, when we walk in the room, they'd say, he looks familiar. Did he used to have a show? That's how I feel now. It's like I walk in the room, people in the air, people say, I think you had a television show. And I did, but I don't anymore. But it was really it was a wonderful run. For many, many years, I worked on NBC, which is the parent of al-Arabiya. I worked on ART, and then for the last 11 years with Abu Dhabi Media. I have a little bit of familiarity with the people who were colleagues, the folks I got to know. And it's an extraordinary group of people. I don't think it's understood here. The degree to which Arab journalists are very free thinking, very creative. People want to do their job well. The notion here is that there are a bunch of government hacks who sort of play out whatever the government line is. Couldn't be further from the truth. And actually, the government hacks who don't do the job well are the ones here. thought that Arab media is not free, but Arab journalists are free in their thoughts and in their aspirations and in their desire to do the job well. American media is free, but most of our journalists are hacks. And the result of what I'd like to do is make a trade. Bring the Arab journalists here so they can get a real dose of freedom and do the job the way that they'd like to do it. Send the American journalists to work and see what it really is like to be restricted. I think it'd be an interesting experience. And I make the point knowing both American journalists and Arab journalists. I mean, the fact that 10 years ago we went into a war and there was virtually no major journalists in America who were actually looking closely at why we went to war and the arguments for the war. In fact, most of our major media was beating the drums, not asking questions at all. And if you look at it, that pack mentality that exists, that sense of corporatization, the sense of deference. I mean, we talk about revolving doors between Congress and lobbies, but the revolving door between government and media. How many talk show hosts were in government? And how many people in government want to get out and become talk show hosts or pass as reporters? And it's not just Fox News or MSNBC. I love MSNBC. It's wonderful entertainment, and it's my political inclination. But it's not news. It's not news. It's a 3-hour rant. And Fox News is a 24-hour rant. And the tragedy is that we don't have news sources. And CNN, which is the best political team on television, is not. I mean, it's a really very, if you think about it, we really are in a sad state of affairs here. But some very creative things are going on there. One of the things that I most benefited from when I was working there was the Arab Broadcast Forum and the Arab Media Forums that get held in the Arab world. I mean, stunning exercises carried live on television by the sponsoring networks that are competitors but still co-sponsor an event. And we'll have forums and debates on, are we covering America fairly? Is there too much or too little religion on our television? Are we reaching young people? Are we treating women fairly as we present them on television? And asked me to do the polling. I did the polling for them in a number. Are we covering Darfur? Or are we ignoring it because it's Sudan and not part of the Levant? Those are the kinds of questions that they would sit there and debate for a whole day. And I thought to myself, CNN, NBC, ABC, and CBS never get together and do that. They don't even do that as a network. No, let's all come together and do it on television so you can see their main presenters debating with each other over how fair or unfair they've been in their coverage of the Arab world. But Arab journalists do that. And it's been a real pleasure to get to know it and see it, and see what they're capable of. So when I was first asked to join Sky as a member of the editorial advisory committee, later to be honored to be the first chair of it, and explain what they were trying to do, was to create an oasis, if you will, for Arab journalists, these young, bright, creative, free-thinking people who want to do the news and do it right. I leapt at the opportunity and have not yet been disappointed. I might be in the future, but I haven't been. In particular, during the preparatory stages, what I was most impressed with were the sessions we had with the trainers we sat down and asked questions. How are you going to do this in rapid fire? You listen to Arab networks, you will hear them never refer to Israel as Israel. It's, Zionist control this or that. Never refer to Golan Heights as Golan Heights. It's something. There'll always be prejudicial terms reflecting the bias. That's the one thing that exists almost region-wide. But we developed the code of standards, and the question is, once you have the code of standards, there then becomes a training process to make sure that the process is internalized by the journalists. And as we went through this grilling exercise, asking journalists, this happens, how do you report it? that happens, how do you say it? This happens, how do you do it? I was very pleased to see that in fact it had become a matter of course. People began a new way of thinking to reflect this new way of presenting. At the same time, we get transcripts, go over transcripts, we have analysis of transcripts, and we go over commentary about the network, which means that if people are on Twitter making negative comments, I want to follow the negative comments. I want to see what they're complaining about, to see whether or not there is a bias in that story. And if I find a bias in the story, as we have found biases in stories, we come together in a meeting and we go to Nart and say, this was an unsourced event, or this was a biased presentation, or this might have been, it might have looked objective and fair, but it wasn't accurate in the way it was presented. Then it's Nart's responsibility as director of news to go back to the crew and make sure that the training process in fact corrects it. We've had a couple of situations where there have been some difficulties, as you would always get on a network, stories misreported, stories that become a bit of a sensation and are flat out wrong, and the corrections have been made, and they've been owned up to, and they've been dealt with. And what I found is, not only is it working for the journalists who have this new home in which they actually can do the news as they see the news fit to be reported, but also is beginning to develop an audience that sees it for what it is. It's new. I mean, just literally just month old. It'll be a year later this month. In May. It'll be a year. Its online presence predated the actual presence on the satellite being a television broadcast, which is itself an indication of the direction they want to go in. They're creating this synergy between online and traditional media, which is going to be absolutely important in the future. But in less than a year, in other words, they've created a niche clearly in the home country, Abu Dhabi, but in Saudi Arabia they're doing well, and in Egypt they're doing quite well. And one of the things I remember coming to a meeting at our editorial committee and feeling quite good about was talking to folks in Saudi Arabia just to get a read on how the network was being viewed. And I heard this from a couple of different people, so much so that it struck home. When I asked them about Sky News Arabia, they didn't compare it with al-Jazeera or al-Arabiya. They compared it to BBC and CNN, which for them meant something moved from the squabbles of internal fighting, which is exactly how the network wanted to position itself, as not the Emirati alternative to the Saudi-run channel or the Qatari-run channel, but a channel that actually transcended those fights and had a different perspective. So far it's working. So far they've been living up to the standards, and when not, get a crack on the knuckles, and it's growing. And it's been an actual pleasure to be a part of it. So thank you.
We're going to open up for questions. I'll let you choose who you'd like
I
to.
think that we have enough people, we can take all the questions.
Great.
We'll start from the back of the room and move forward.
Thank you. The gentleman to your right expressing criticism of American journalists not being free and cited MSNBC and Fox News, but did not mention another source of news, Democracy Now! I wonder if he has any reference to that. But beyond that, we talked about freedom of Arab journalists. What about what's happening right now in Egypt? Are journalists really free with respect to tackling issues that criticize governments, that criticize religion, and that criticize treatment of women? And what kind of coverage do you give to those issues without fear of having your journalists arrested?
I'll take the second part first. Egypt is very interesting actually, because what we've seen is that we as a channel, we've been able to cover Egypt quite freely. We've had a few incidents. We've had one of our female reporters attacked aggressively, and we had to take her to hospital. It got that bad. We do get both sides of the spectrum, or both sides of the spectrum, criticizing us. So that's a good thing. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think in terms of reporting Egypt with all the elements that you've mentioned, I'm going to speak about ourselves first and then talk a little bit about the others. We do. We certainly try to do. Do we do enough? I don't think so, because it's such a moving story all the time that you always have something. When we sit through our editorial meetings in the morning, we've got one or two stories in Syria, one or two in the Gulf, one here, one there, and you have a list of 5 or 6 things happening all the time in Egypt. But I think Egypt is very interesting because it's allowing the journalists to speak up. But what is happening is a lot of polarization. So what you have is some of the pan-Arab channels and some of the local channels have sponsors and have ideas and preconceived ideas. So some channel would ignore an attack on women, for example, in Tahrir Square. Others will highlight it more than any of the other stories. So I think you have that polarization in Egypt, which is happening because of the political spectrum. But we try certainly to highlight everything that we can. And then you've got an interesting part where you'd ask someone from the official side to come on the show or come on and speak, and they would say, who's on the show with me? You say, well, who do you think? It's your opposite side. And they say, no, we're not going to come on the show. So it's very challenging, but I think what's happening in Egypt, from a journalistic point of view, is positive. From an event or from what's happening, it's quite complicated and very difficult, and sometimes not very nice. So it's been a good story to cover from a journalistic point of view, but it's certainly been very difficult for especially the female journalists.
Let me say directly to your question, the Egyptian government is behaving abominably toward its journalists right now. They're behaving abominably in a whole number of ways, but toward journalists in particular, this Bassem Youssef trial is a farce. I mean, he's funny, they're a farce. And I think this is something that's going to have to work out. I ultimately think that the Bassem Youssefs of Egypt are going to win. It's the Egyptian culture. The current presidency is not the culture of that country. It's not the direction that Egypt's going to want to go in. But when I said that Arab journalists are free, I meant in their minds they're free. They actually think free. And when they're given the opportunity, they write and they speak freely. And that's very different than the culture I live with in Washington, where you don't want to be, they think they're free. Actually, the Arab journalists know they're not free, but they behave accordingly. But American journalists actually think they're free. But I can't ask that question, because if I ask that question, I won't get access. Or, I live next door to the guy, and, I'd like to ask him, but, I don't want to, and he's a friend. We played Little League together. The kids are, I mean, they're bound by so many constraints. I went one time to the correspondence dinner, once. I stood in the lobby. It was shameful. And I just left. I mean, there's all these guys in monkey suits sucking up to each other. And I thought to myself, how do these guys cover the government that they're supposed to be able to cover objectively when they're so busy fawning over, the deputy something or other, because they want access. So, enough said about that. With regard to your first point, I remember democracy now. I love democracy now. That's not mainstream media, and it's not where most people get their source of information. But you will find in the Arab world too, that there are these alternative media sources now found in social media that are completely free and are really quite extraordinary in what they're able to do. But alternative media versus mainstream media is you know, they're different worlds. Yeah.
Thank you. So 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to talk to the editor-in-chief of the National, Hassan Fatah, and we had a discussion about the challenges that he faces being based in Abu Dhabi. So I understand that you're a completely different kind of media activist. You have leadership, not leadership, but being based in Abu Dhabi yourselves, what do you think? How do you think your challenges are similar or different in terms of journalistic?
I think I think what Hassan faces is something different. I think also you have to keep in mind that Abu Dhabi Media is a government entity, whereas we're not. So that, as a start, is a completely different proposition. But I think you know, when we were thinking of the project and we were coming up with it as well, that's the sort of thing exactly that we were asking. And again, this is the sort of issues that I'm always quizzed by the editorial advisory committee. How do you cover things locally? And I think it's very important to keep in mind that this is an ongoing process. The first time I worked in the UAE was in 2002. 10 years on, and it's moved on quite a bit. It's changed quite a bit. But this is a process that's going to take a long time. But I think in terms of access, there's always going to be challenges. But that's our job as journalists to push the envelope and to ask the questions and to keep on asking and saying, why can't I have access to this? Why can't I report this? Why can't I go to this place? Why can't I do this? Why can't I? So that's something that we have to do. But it's an ongoing process as well, where they will learn how to deal with the media. You couldn't get anyone to comment on the screen 10 years ago, or it was very difficult. Now you have journalists, you have professors, you have different people who are willing to give their opinion. So I think this is part of the process, and that's why this project is very unique. I think the government of Abu Dhabi or a sponsor is very capable of launching 10 channels, not just one channel, and with a very large budget. But the whole idea of going into a joint venture with an international organization such as Sky News and with Sky B is to make sure exactly those are the sort of things that are tackled, and that's exactly, you know, the sort of standard that will be brought in. The editorial advisory committee is also unique. It doesn't exist in any other organization in the region. The code of ethics that we have and the style book that we have, if you look at everyone else's, it's a page or two. Ours is a whole book that deals with terminology, deals with coverage, sourcing, all that kind of thing that probably is also quite unique. So that's the whole concept of trying to do things slightly differently than the others, and hopefully, as I was saying, this is a long-term project, and not a one-day thing.
Let me just say this about Hassan and the National. I know that he has concerns, and they're very legitimate. I also think that he doesn't sometimes, being in the thick of the fight, see the real progress that he's made and that the paper's made in the country. I remember, you know, just a few years ago, they broke a story about child abuse. The head guy in the country sees the story. His daughter is livid about it. They asked us to do a survey to find out the extent of the problem. They then dealt with it. You read in the National, a year and a half later, a new system of laws. Big problem was there's child abuse everywhere. The problem was there was no law requiring doctors, teachers, social workers to report it. And so people fell back on traditional culture, which is, maybe it's the parents' right to have privacy and not to probe too much to find out where the abuse is coming from. They saw a child, they knew the child had been physically abused. They didn't want to get into the privacy of the family. It's now in the law of UAE. If you see a child abuse case, you must report it. It must be investigated by the authorities. The National broke that story. I was there, little, and that goes from the big ones to something maybe little, but I think it was a big one. They passed a law in the country requiring stores, little shops, to have a certain amount of space between aisles, to have clean, a more clean environment in the stores. Shelves couldn't be from the floor to the ceiling, they had to be a certain height. If you walked into some of them, they were like, you're a dusty attic or a very crowded and congested cellar. Not very appetizing, but there were no restrictions, no codes. So they passed the codes. One of the tragic consequences of the codes was that a lot of guys who've been in business for 30, 40 years didn't have the money to get the loans or didn't have the collateral to get the loans to fix up the shops, and they were losing their businesses. The National began a series every day reporting on new stores. This guy who'd had the store for 40 years was passing it off to his son, but now the store is closing and he has to go back to India. This guy's losing his store, and what a sad thing it is. This guy who, and after reading those stories for a week, government relents and says, we're going to give them an extra several months and we're going to make the loans available, etc. National did that. Point is that they have done some very challenging stories and made some real headway in making change in the country. And I know that they've got problems and that they're dealing with problems, but I also think sometimes that they don't see the impact that they're having in making real change and doing what they were sort of created to do, which is to define a new standard of journalism in the country, which they've, I think, done. They've done this kind of crusading, investigative reporting of local problems, diabetes, and the lack of labeling on foods for people with diabetes. And again, there's a bunch of them. Down syndrome and the lack of facilities, etc. Stories that wouldn't have gotten coverage in other Arab newspapers because people just didn't see it. But the National is there to see things that others don't see, write them, and then challenge authorities to take a look at them and deal with them. So I think Hassan's done a great job, and they've done some really interesting work.
Yes, I found the observation of Dr. Jim about
This is going to be the standard now.
Yeah.
Dr. Jim. I have to roll anything. Sorry.
About the press in this country being free, but the journalists probably not so much. I am not a journalist, but I am a very active writer of opinion pieces, and I wrote for every newspaper in the US practically. My experience is that the press is not totally free. And I say this because I write about many different subjects, but every time I call an editor and I offer a piece that is critical of Islam, he doesn't want to see it. They don't even want to see it. Not to publish it, they don't want to see it. So I want to know your opinion about it.
I've been in that boat.
That is you, not me.
Yeah. I mean, there's blinkers. What's allowable in the public debate and what's not allowable in the public debate. I think it's changing in some ways on those issues. Certainly, President Clinton helped it along during his time. Didn't change a lot during the Bush administration. But we're, there are, my concern is not so much how we report certain issues, but it's how we cover government and how we feel free or not free to cover government. And I can't help but reflect 10 years ago how we went to war and the role the media played in it. And I will never forget. I mean, it's interesting today, people look at that mission accomplished speech, the George Bush one, as a really bad joke. But go back and see how it was covered. Chris Matthews, a friend of mine, you know, that's what Americans like. A president with swagger, a president who knows how to get the job done and can stand there proudly and tell the American people. He's like John Wayne. I mean, what's her name? Gwen Eiffel. I mean, a very distinguished journalist. You know, said it was like a movie playing out of real heroism and going. I mean, and the point, what I love is that when journalists then get to the point where they turn, and it's like Gene McCarthy, who you again won't remember. Nobody remembers what I remember. Too old. I have to just give it up. Ran for president in 1968. He was the anti-war candidate. That the whole riots in Chicago were around the McCarthy campaign. But Gene McCarthy used to say the press are like crows on a high wire, on an electric wire. One lands, they all land, one takes off, they all take off. So sometime around 2005, they all took off on Bush, and they turned. And while they demand that the administration be accountable for what they did, nobody in journalism demands that journalism be accountable for what they did. I mean, the 10th anniversary of the war passed, the Washington Post did not have a single article on its editorial page about the war, because they were the biggest rooters for the war. They didn't want to get into covering it or even acknowledging 10 years later. And that's the thing I mean. That's the fault I see in our journalism.
Hi, so at the beginning of your talk, you kind of contrasted pan-Arab news stations with sponsored channels that are sponsored by governments, and you kind of said that they, have an agenda, for example. But this project, and please correct me if I'm wrong, your 50-50 shareholder is a Maktoum prince, right? He's a member of the royal family, and if I'm not mistaken, please correct me, isn't he the deputy prime minister of the UAE, current deputy prime minister of the UAE, correct? Now, I mean, you said that, Dr. Zogby, were saying that the station is oftentimes seen in the region as more like BBC or CNN than al-Jazeera, but at the same time, I mean, that's a huge government interest in your station, and we're talking about a country where, for example, recently academics have been prevented from visiting because of their views on Bahrain, and, I mean, Christopher Davidson said the UAE is one of the least free countries in the Gulf in the area of freedom of speech, which is saying something. Christopher Davidson, recent talk at the LSE. I was going to ask you, you've said so far, Dr. Zogby, that so far it's working, and that's great. I was just wondering what kind of safeguards you have in place if this becomes an issue, if speech issues, and I'm not denying that there are serious issues with American journalism and massive structural problems, of course, but the issues are different, right? So what kind of editorial safeguards do you have in case these pressures become serious?
I think this goes back to one of the things I was saying, that the structure of the channel, the structure of the company is unique. And again, Sheikh Mansour is a businessman. He's got a lot of interest, and he owns Manchester City Football Club as well, amongst a lot of other things. But I think could he have financed a channel on his own? I'm sure he could have, several channels. But that's the whole point of the joint venture, is that people will ask these questions. This is a perfectly legitimate question to ask, and these are the sort of issues that would have to be tackled, and that's exactly why the partnership happened, and that's exactly why. So these issues are tackled and these questions are answered. That's why there's a joint venture partnership, which is 50-50. It's not 51, it's not 52, it's 50-50. And the representation on the board is also 50-50. That's one thing. The second thing is the independent management of the channel. There is absolutely no interaction or interference from the owners in what we do. And the third thing that we make sure that we establish in order to actually answer that question, which we've been asked several times, is the editorial advisory committee. The editorial advisory committee is an integral part of the joint venture. it's not an afterthought. You know, we're going to get asked that question. So why do we do this? This was agreed between the partners that this is an entity of independent, well-known individuals. If you look at the names that are on the committee, you know, they speak for themselves. Dr. Jim is the chairman. We have probably our only difficulty with the advisory committee is making sure that everything is transcribed to be read and to be judged in a way. But those are the sort of questions that we knew were going to come up. And that's why ultimately what we do and what we put on screen is going to answer all these questions. And I think if you're able to watch it, if you're able to look at it, even this very simple usage of terminology, which is very common with Arab journalists, we've taken every precaution to make sure that whoever watches it and reads the transcripts will realize that this is different and this is unique and this is something that has come up from the thinking of the joint venture between the two partners. Don't you want to add something?
I was with al-Arabiya channel for about almost 11 years before the show was ended. And I was asked all the time, you ever get interference? Does anybody ever interfere? And the honest truth is, yes. And the times that I was interfered with were the best ideas I'd ever gotten. For example, a week before the war was to start, incidentally, the government of UAE, no friend of Saddam Hussein. But they had the idea, and they posed to me, to do a direct dialogue between American students and students at the University of Baghdad. It's online on my website at AAIUSA. Stunning conversation. Stunning conversation. These kids from Baghdad, I mean, the American kids were divided among themselves over the war. Kids from Baghdad were scared out of their minds, knew what was going to happen. And then a month and a half later, we returned and did a follow-up conversation with some of the same kids. And then on the 4th anniversary, we did another one to find out where people had gone, what they did. And my college, the one that I was teaching at the time, Davidson, in North Carolina, the entire campus turned out for this. The University of Baghdad, on the other hand, had real security problems, and so they had to meet in a hotel. But another one, first anniversary in 9/11, Tom Friedman had done a piece for National Geographic called The Roots of 9/11. Tom and I have history, and he's not one of my favorite journalists at all. But The Roots of 9/11 was a very challenging piece on what was going on in the Arab world where this happened, and asked some pretty tough questions. The government bought rights to show it, showed it to a student audience in the UAE, and then had me sit with Tom Friedman at Ground Zero. We set up a makeshift studio at Ground Zero where he and they engaged in a conversation after having watched the show, and we televised the whole thing. And I could go on. I mean, when the camel jockey episode occurred in UAE, when they were having kid camel jockeys and it was a scandal, they knew they had to correct it. I had the head of Human Rights Watch on the show, and he took questions, she took questions and calls from all over the world, including from UAE, about it. Never said a word about it. Migrant workers, and the problem with migrant workers in UAE. I did shows on migrant workers and took calls from UAE about it, including migrant workers from UAE. And they never complained about it. So, I mean, I know Bruce Davidson's work, and yeah, whatever. But the point is that what we know at the channel is that the big test for whether this network works or not is how we cover issues that are sensitive close to home. And we know that. And we have a very close eye on that. There's now a case going on in the courts right now. We're watching it. We're watching it not only to see how it plays out, but we're watching to see how the network covers it. And if it doesn't cover it with the same fairness that it covers a trial in Egypt, then we'll have to step in and speak about it. We also know that Bahrain, a very sensitive issue for the UAE, how the network covers Bahrain is going to set us apart from al-Jazeera and from Saudi Arabia, and from al-Arabiya in Saudi Arabia. So these are issues that we're paying attention to. Not perfect, but at least we know what the problems are, and we're aware of how the network is dealing with these issues, and we're going to hold our feet to the fire about it and see if it works or doesn't work.
Just goes back to the coverage of the war and thinking about the U.S. perspective versus possibly the Arab war. And I was wondering if how the control room, the film, I'm assuming you're control room film, and how that impacted or circulated within Arab journalists, and what they, what kind of consensus was about the film circulating in the region. I don't have a sense of that circulation there.
I think it's probably had more impact here really than there. I don't think it was widely circulated. But I think the coverage of the war back then it was just basically there were two channels, or in the Arab world, it was Abu Dhabi TV and Al Jazeera, and it was a very interesting time because we had I was working at Abu Dhabi TV at the time, and we had quite a big operation in Baghdad, and that was a very delicate situation in a lot of cases because we were under a lot of pressure from the Iraqis. But I think the issue of the Arab world and what happened with the coverage, for a long time, Al Jazeera could never do anything wrong in the minds of Arab viewers. It's not until very recently that the Pan-Arab channels have come, they're sort of exposed, maybe the word, or they've seen that they've taken a position for one side or the other. But the Iraq story back then, and control room and all these things, there was really no division amongst Arab viewers or Arabs as to where they stand with the war and against Saddam Hussein. I don't think there was any. Nobody disagreed that he had to go. I think maybe the way he went and the timing of it and the war and so on, nobody wanted to see a war. But yeah, it was that was the case with control. In fact, the main character who's in the film works for us. It works for us.
It works for us.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I was interested. I was in Paris and was able to see the coverage on Al Jazeera and Sky. Now, I don't know if it was your Sky.
Sorry, which one?
I don't know if it was your Sky News, Sky News Arabia, or what it was, but I was watching the Benghazi incident, the attack on Gaza, and then beginnings of the situation in Syria. As you reflect on the coverage of your channel and on Al Jazeera particularly, and those three key events, how do you see them? How effective were they? I was able to see Brian Williams from here who couldn't put his finger, on Benghazi on the map hardly. But anyway, I'm interested in how you view the coverage of those three key and the ongoing coverage from your point of view.
I think the coverage of Gaza and the events in Gaza was actually one of the items that we, for lack of a better word, dissected in our post review of what happened. And basically, it's very difficult when it happens with an Israeli story and a Palestinian story that you have to keep reminding the journalists that you have to get the other side of the story. And I think in comparison to the others, we probably gave the Israeli side more airtime than the others did. And in fact, when we had the spokesperson, I can't remember who it was, on, you can see that the others tend to follow and they say, well, okay, well they haven't, then we should. we should do that. But I think with a story like that, you have to literally walk down to the newsroom, stand in the middle of the newsroom, and that's basically my role and the senior people to say, look guys, remember, you get the other side of the story, and you make sure you get this, and you make sure you get that, you're present in that place. So it comes down to very basics, really, of coverage. And the machine works in its own way, but you have to step in once in a while as editorial management and say, remember to do this, and remember to cover this side. Or have you had someone from the other side on recently in the last hour or so? I think the Benghazi story is a different way of looking at it when it comes to Arab channels than something like the US, the way it's covered in the US, because then it becomes interpreted into local politics, whereas we will step back and look at it from a pure event and this, and then that happened. And I think it's a different point of view that we don't have any political gain in blaming either the security of the embassy or anything like that. We don't really need to go into these things. In comparison with the others, I think what we are hearing in the feedback that people do recognize that we are more balanced in terms of bringing different voices on. I think with the Egypt story, you can look at a channel and see what the country that they belong to, what position they've taken on the story. You don't see it, hopefully, at least I hope you don't actually see it when you're watching Sky News. There's a very interesting thing about Arab media as well, that compared to, we're probably closer to what we think is good, closer to more of a maybe a British look into journalism than American. And I think I read somewhere as well recently that in the US, you have to take a position to attract a certain number of viewers. So if you're MSNBC, you have a certain line, and you know who your viewers are. And if you're CNN, you're probably losing out on a lot of the viewers because you're trying to be something that the others aren't. And I think it's completely the opposite. The model changes in the Arab world, where now if you are seen to be taking a position, you will lose out. And you have to be perceived as balanced, and you have all sides of the story in order to succeed. And I think that's the difference in the model. It flips when you go to the Middle East. So it's a different way of coverage.
Is your station ad supported?
Yes.
So then aren't you beholden to your advertisers and your news coverage?
Quick answer is no. I think the advertising culture in the market in the Arab world hasn't developed as much as to become advertorial as opposed to editorial. We haven't got to that model where people change and do programs specifically to cater for a particular product. We're very, very careful, although it's actually quite interesting because there are no laws, there are no rules with pan-Arab satellite channels as what you can and cannot do in terms of advertising. But we all tend to follow the same rules that nobody's signed up on, which is no tobacco, no alcohol, advertising, like a lot of other places. But there's actually no law that combines everything, so you can't do this or you can't do that. But you have to self-regulate. And what we've done is that anything that has to do with the actual news coverage, you can't sponsor that. There's no sponsorship on anything like that. Most of the sponsorship that happens is on sports and business, and then general sponsorship of the channel. But no, we haven't had a situation where an advertiser said, "I want you to do this, otherwise I'm going to pull the plug on you." That culture doesn't exist. I hope I answered your question. Sorry, go ahead.
My question: how do you see the future of pan-Arab channels? I think that Prince Al-Walid is preparing to launch his new channels. Will that come to compete with your channel or with al-Arabiya or al-Jazeera? And recently I read that al-Jazeera, for example, is showing its lower rating ever. Do you think that that is related to its coverage of certain issues, Bahrain, maybe Egypt and all that, or it just because with what happened in certain countries, like especially Egypt and Tunisia, and you have this about half of the Arab population that has now access to free press locally, that they no longer need like other channels or people abroad to tell them what they looking to hear.
I think it's both.
It's all the above, really. These are all factors that have changed the viewership patterns. And as I was saying before, what you had before was a government-controlled TV station in all the Arab world. So you had the 8 o'clock bulletin that was full of protocol, and then opposite that you had al-Jazeera for a long, long time on its own, and then al-Arabiya came afterwards. And basically, people ran away from their local channels, their government-led channels, to all these pan-Arab channels, just because they thought they had a little bit more there was more freedom there. But with the changes that have happened, it's changed completely. You know, you have local channels now that are not necessarily commercially successful yet, but they will at some point, that have come up and have taken a lot of the viewership. So I think the future is, you know, there's no way, there is no commercial structure that can withhold 800 channels, 800 plus. So what you probably have is a model where you have 4 or 5 local channels, and it'll probably come down to 3 or 4 pan-Arab channels that are very well financed and well managed, that can cover the other countries other than the one that they're in. But I think one thing that you don't see in the Arab world is alliances, which will grow. There are a lot of alliances that are building. We're trying to build alliances with local channels, local private channels. And you're going to see a lot more of that, where I have an alliance with a channel in Tunisia, one in Egypt, and one in Morocco or somewhere else. And you have all these things all coming together. But why has it changed? It's all the above. It's all the above. There's been, it's become obvious that there is a certain, we're the only Arab channel that has a bureau in Damascus. We're the only ones that have a bureau in Damascus. And if you think about it, other than the channels that are known to be pro-Syrian government, either al-Nart or Mayadeen, these channels are mostly affiliated with Hezbollah. So we're the only channel that actually has reporting from there and from the rebel side. So that kind of thing, viewers are intelligent. They know what's going on. They know that this is a channel that has both sides of the story, as opposed to one that's running purely YouTube material that's picked up from the rebels, or that they have someone only in the north. That kind of thing is becoming very obvious to viewers, and people know where you stand and what you're trying to do. And that's why it's affecting a lot of the viewership for some of these channels.
Thank you. In terms of coverage of events in the Arab world, how much does Sky News Arabiya work with Sky News English? Do you think that the establishment of this new channel has affected the way that Sky News English covers these events, or do the two not really work together that much?
It's changed a lot, I should say that. We're sort of learning how to deal with each other, but certainly there's a lot of cooperation that happens on stories that break. For example, there was a story about a bunch of British tourists that were in a balloon that fell in southern Egypt. And that's the kind of thing where we're expected in the region to be the first to react and the first ones to be on the story. And that's where we cooperate. I think, hopefully, I'd like to think that with our correspondents, the English-speaking correspondents that are in some of these bureaus, have added a little bit more context. But also, I think in terms of editorial management, Sky in the UK, the interaction that happens on a daily basis, and they see our day sheet, we see their day sheet, we know what they're doing, we know where our weaknesses are, and we try to get their assistance. So in stories like health and technology, They do them really, really well, so that's what we think that we can benefit from. But also our network in the Middle East is something that they feel that they can benefit from. But in terms of news agenda, we're completely different. They're very UK-centric, whereas we're very broader pan-Arab. They work on one time zone, we work on 5. So it's a bit, but certainly the big story that happens in the future, whatever that is, huge one. Hopefully we won't see it, but when it does happen, that's really when we start working together on some of these big stories.
How is the attachment of the Sky News brand to the channel affected? How it's being marketed and received? And also, I'm particularly thinking of maybe when you're trying to reach Arab speakers who live in the UK, who also have a lot of connotations with Sky in the UK.
Yeah, it's a great question. That was one of our biggest worries, by the way, before we launched. It was something that we discussed, something we did a survey on as well. Initially, and there's a bad news and good news. The bad news is that in the beginning we thought it was going to be negative. It would be perceived as a company that is like the other ones that are sponsored, who are just translating content and putting it out to the Middle East. That was our fear. When we did a survey 6 months into the launch, that was one of the questions that we asked. And there was absolutely no attachment that this is an English channel translated into Arabic.
Let me also just add in, of all the international networks that we polled in our survey, all Sky had the least recognition across the Arab world. So it was unbranded. If you put Fox, they would have known. They didn't know Sky. So in a sense, it's more virgin territory than it would be if it had the Murdoch association. It didn't exist.
No. And because it was based in Abu Dhabi, and you can see it as well, you can see where we're based. We have local guys in their national address as well on the screen. So I think any fear that we had completely disappeared as soon as we went on air.
A lot of the presenters are folks who came from other networks on their own. They didn't get poached. I mean, they just, and some of them were some of the most respected in the region. And that also created a synergy that developed a certain branding for the network as different. Oh, I know him from here, I know her from there, I know this one from there. In that sense that this was kind of a new meeting place of folks.
Yeah. There was a concern in the beginning, but luckily it didn't materialize.
Thank you very much for joining us. We have a reception downstairs, and we hope you'll stay and continue to ask questions.